Welcome to the podcast about stories from the center of the universe. I'm Daniel Lance.
I'm Paul Gilman, and this is Pod 1.
Pete Silvester is a social scientist, entrepreneur, and proud Territorian who has traveled the world by virtue of a career in international aid and development. He has spent many years in Southeast Asia and came on to give us his take on the events in Myanmar. Myanmar, formerly Burma, was under military rule for about 50 years before it began its experiment with democracy in the early 2010s. As it reopened to the outside world, the international community looked on with enthusiasm, and financial aid and investment began flowing into the country. Pete jumped right into the mix, moving to Yangon to establish a company that served as both a startup incubator and a consultancy to help build an inclusive private sector in Myanmar. He and his family now live in Thailand. In our conversation, Pete tells us about the Territorian upbringing, his travels, the wanderlust that is shared by many in the international aid scene, and his perspective on Myanmar, the Rohingya, Aung San Suu Kyi, and of course the military coup that happened 1 week ago on February 1st. So here is Pete Silvester.
Okay, Pete Silvester, welcome to Pod 1. Happy to have you.
Great to be here, guys. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I guess we should start with saying our connection to you, Pete, is through John Watts. So I guess we should start with how you know John.
John Watts and I, fresh out of college, as you'd say, undergraduate, as I'd say, we got recruited to the Department of Defense in Australia. And our first, what we call rotation, like the first position we're put in the Department of Defense, we're sitting next to each other. And we had a blast getting in terms of trying to figure out this massive, ridiculous organization together. He and I were each other's comic relief for a whole lot of seriousness that was going on. And so we made good friends. And we're also new to Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, as you know. And it's a weird little town. And so we used to joke about how awful it is. And then, we stayed in touch after I left Canberra. He stayed there for a few more years, and then he made his way across to DC, as you know, and joined the National Guard there and did some interesting work in the Pentagon and for some think tanks. And eventually I did my master's degree and got recruited to a consultancy with the World Bank in DC. And so that was like right after my grad school when I was like completely broke. And, moving to America when you're completely broke, particularly a relatively expensive city like DC is a challenge, and John Watts helped me out a lot. So I owe a lot of favors to John Watts, and he asked me to chat to you guys, and so I'm happy to oblige.
John is a very, very good man, and he's quite thoughtful, and he is a more than decent human being in every encounter I've ever had with him. So Pete, you and I are lucky to know him, and Daniel, of course, has met him as well. Yeah. So, Pete, let's talk about growing up in Australia. I have no idea what that's like other than the handful of things that John has told me, but John's story is unique, just like your story is. So tell us about your childhood.
John Watts grew up in South Australia. I grew up in North Australia. His state is called South Australia. Mine's called the Northern Territory. So I grew up in Darwin, which actually has a huge U.S. military presence, and that's one of the few things that it does actually have. It's a small town, very remote, probably the most remote small town in the world. One of them. Perth is also very, very remote, but so essentially the nearest town from Darwin is Dili in East Timor. It's closer to Singapore than it is to Sydney, I think.
Oh wow!
And so it's a fun little weird environment to grow up in. Very safe, small town. Had a great time. Lots of interesting characters. Like a lot of people that go there for government jobs. And a lot of people go there for like a bit of a sea change from the southeast of Australia. So you get a lot of hippies mixing with a lot of like very square people, which creates some fun things. It's a very being a remote town and being in the center of like a lot of Aboriginal history and tribes, it's got a lot of connections with Aboriginal Australia. It's got very close proximity to a lot of really amazing parts of Australia in terms of the natural environment, like Kakadu National Park, Litchfield National Park. So yeah, we used to just cruise around on our bicycles, pretty much run wild, try to avoid crocodiles. And yeah, it was a fun place to grow up. I was there until I was only about 11 or 12 years old, but I still consider myself a Territorian, just because I don't want to say that I'm a Melburnian, because that's boring.
I've heard you talked about crocodiles. I understand that there are like a ridiculous number of poisonous animals in Australia. Is that true?
Oh yeah, everything's poisonous. Even I'm poisonous. Someone else is certainly poisonous.
How do you share your poison? Is it purely verbal?
I guess you have to ask my wife.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to get into that.
So tell us a little bit about Aborigines in Australia. It's Americans can't have any appreciation for that. It sounds like you grew up in a world where it was commonplace. Being around Aborigines was commonplace.
Yeah, look, honestly, I don't think that I'm the least bit knowledgeable about Aboriginal Australia. It's a very complex situation. And especially I found that trying to talk about, growing up in a pretty Aboriginal town. I mean, Darwin, even compared to other towns, smaller towns, is not that I guess, connected with Aboriginal Australia either, but compared to other big cities. But talking to Americans where your own racial history and political dynamics is so much more complex. I mean, I wouldn't say more complex, but it's different. And it's a really big thing on the top of everyone's minds. And so I'm kind of hesitant to really talk about that subject, to be honest.
Yeah, it's all fair.
We're not getting it right. And nobody, like most countries, like post-colonial countries particularly, none of us are getting it really, really right. But, trying to share each other's perspectives I just found that particularly with Americans who, have such a complex relationship with race, it just gets me into trouble, to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough.
As much as I'm fascinated by it, I just don't feel like I'm confident enough to talk about it without putting my foot in it.
Yeah, trust me, we have similar challenges over here when we even begin to imagine a productive conversation about those sorts of things.
Yeah, but it's growing up in Darwin as a child, the scenes, the interactions you have with Aboriginals in Darwin, which is an urban environment, is disproportionately negative, because a lot of the Aboriginal communities, at least back then in the 1980s and 1990s, that you come across, they're coming into town to party and to let loose. Sorry, that's my dog.
All good.
And so, you walk to school and you're passing people that, hanging out in the grass and getting drunk or something. And that's not what Aboriginal Australia is about. And I don't really want to share those sort of stories and suggest that's representative. But yeah, scenes of poverty, definite health problems which are persistent to this day, mental health problems particularly. We're stuffed up in Australia in terms of the way that we've structured our relationship with Aboriginal Australia. And I'm not sure what the answer is either, but it's in a completely different and complex way. If anything, if you have to draw an analogy to American life, there's similarities I've seen based on my time in America with what's happening with Native Americans, and the way that you as the dominant power, the white America, is trying to manage the Native and Aboriginal populations it's a similar sort of challenge you guys are having, but I'm sure completely different in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not intend to go there, but I didn't realize you grew up where you grew up as a Territorian, which, by the way, is a new term for me. I've learned at least one thing tonight.
Sounds cool, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does.
Sounds like we go around lifting our legs against poles and stuff, but no, Territorians are good people. We tend to be pretty rough and ready, and I kind of feel like if I had to have another region in America that we would like relate with, I feel like Texans, maybe, because it's like a big state. Not that many people. Oh, Texas is a lot of people, but at the same time, it's very remote. So maybe like Alaskans.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that sort of people. But the entire political spectrum of Australia would fit within the Democratic Party most of the time. So I wouldn't call us a red state. I know that I follow American politics quite a lot, so I know that's like a variable that you guys are thinking about a lot. Anyway.
Yeah, Pete, you may know more about American politics than I do. I've turned off every media outlet for the last few months. It got quite crazy here, apparently. Hey, so you moved to your family moved to Melbourne. It sounds like as an 11 or 12-year-old. Was your experience in Melbourne drastically different than your territory time?
Yeah, for sure. Melbourne's like, I mean, by Australian standards, an old city, an older city. I mean, Australia is a very egalitarian country, but Darwin is like the most egalitarian, or probably, I mean, I haven't been everywhere in Australia, but a very egalitarian culture, like fiercely egalitarian. And I went to like a private school in Melbourne, and that's like a completely different experience where lots of rich kids, and it's culturally very different. At least to the experience when I was growing up very early years. So a lot more competitive. Like Darwin was, a very very relaxed, chilled out sort of Australia compared to Melbourne. Australians in general are thought of as a pretty happy-go-lucky, easygoing people, but in the urban environments, the big ones like Melbourne, Sydney, maybe Brisbane, Perth, it's not that way really. So yeah, it's a change of speed, but I think it was ready. Like the school quality in Darwin is far less than the sort of schools that you could go to in Melbourne, and so my parents decided to send me down there for my high school times. And I got to say, it's pronounced Melbourne.
Melbourne. How did I say it?
Melbn.
Melbourne.
Melbourne.
Melbourne. I'm getting closer. I'm still screwing it up, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, no, I don't need to correct every American when they're trying to pronounce Australian city names, but if we're talking about it.
Well, no, you should correct me, and Daniel should give it a try.
Yeah, Melbourne. It's weird though because it's we definitely have the hard R in America, and there's more of a, I don't know. It's like when I was reading Harry Potter as a kid, a lot of the time you'd see the word er to be like It's like the equivalent to the American UH, and so I was like, why are they saying all the time? I don't understand, but it's just the difference in pronunciation.
Yeah, we got a casual disrespect for the letter R in Australia.
There are parts of America that also.
The word Harry Potter, we'll pronounce the R's in the Harry because you got two there, so it sounds like it's pretty important, but not at the end of it. Not at the end of the word ever.
Right. It's hard to get through the word Harry without saying the R. Can't imagine. Yeah. So you were high school in Melbourne.
Now you're getting worse. That's great.
I'm trying to do the Melbourne in the end, but it's not working out. And then did you go on to university?
Yeah, I did undergraduate or college in Melbourne, and yeah, I went abroad for my master's studies. But yeah.
And then how did you get? Well, let's start with what did you study?
I studied commerce and arts. It's kind of it's popular in Australia for some reason to do double undergraduate degrees, which takes 5 years. I'm not sure why. It's such a bad idea. It takes so long. So yeah, I did 2 undergraduate degrees, as most of my friends did, and then I did an honors degree as well at the end of that. And to do an honors degree, I think it's kind of like the British system, where you do an extra year on top of your 5 years to do an honors thesis, and then you get like honors in brackets at the end of your degree names. So I've got
that'd be a 6-year thing for like basically equivalent of a bachelor's with honors.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's too much study really, but it's like 2 bachelor's degrees, 1 with an honors degree attached to it. I could have attached an honors degree to the other one, but that would have been like 7 years. I might as well be a doctor at that point. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and
then I did 2 years of master's studies, and so yeah,
was your master's in the same line as the arts and commerce?
No, I did a master of public policy, but technically I did a double master's degree as well. But
so wait a minute, Pete, how old were you when you finally left school?
Well, I took a bit of breaks, but I guess I finished my master's degrees at the age of like 25 or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I don't tend to tell people that I got a double master's degree. I mean, it's like having three nipples. You know, they're all individually very nice, but it looks a bit weird.
That's a good. I might use that one. That's
That
good.
is good.
Oh, so you said you were overseas for your master's. Where were you?
I did my first master's. It's kind of like a double degree combo thing that, you know, each master's would be a 2-year thing, but it was kind of like combined, so it's not two separate masters. The first master's was in Singapore at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and the second master's was in Sciences Po in Paris, in France. So, yeah.
So were all those courses being taught in English or the native language?
Yeah, English.
Yeah.
I don't think I could study any other language.
And did you have like you're very well traveled. So did you have this like travel bug from the get-go, from early on?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I mean, that's part of the reason why I did a master's degree, just because I was bored and I wanted to get out of Australia for a while. And someone gave me a scholarship to go study abroad, and I thought, wow, that sounds fun. But yeah, like halfway through my undergraduate degrees, this 6-year slog, I was just kind of finding myself really bored and depressed, and I didn't see any end in sight. So I just sort of hit pause for my whole studies for a year. And me and my best buddy, we just started traveling. We went around the world on a backpacker trip, which is what a lot of Australians do. And yeah, kind of got the travel bug then, and haven't really stopped traveling ever since. This is when I was like 21, 20 years old. And so yeah, I was kind of like trying to find a life that could allow me to travel, and I guess I did.
That's awesome. So tell us about like what kind of job it is that allows you to travel. Like what has your career been?
Well, yeah, my career's been super messy. I'm not even sure what I call myself. My parents don't always just tell people when they ask, "Oh, what's Pete doing?" But I guess the general theme is like international development, which is, you know, USAID. They're a big player in international development. And people in that sector or industry, they tend to travel around a bit. They get posted. They move themselves, and they're kind of comfortable just like upping stumps is a cricket reference. I shouldn't use that for an American audience, but uprooting themselves, let's say, and
Nice.
and dragging themselves across the planet, and we're just vagabonds. A lot of the people eventually sort of settle down in a place like Washington, D.C., where there's still a lot of jobs for people like us. But some of us just keep on traveling until we die. So yeah, my wife also is from that sector. We met when we were in grad school, and she had an interest in traveling. She grew up in Singapore. She's American, but grew up in Singapore, studied back in Atlanta, and then wanted to keep on moving ever since. And so we're bouncing around, really.
That's very cool. So I actually, due to my dad's job, I moved around as a kid every 3 or 4 years, and a lot of that was international too. So I was in Bolivia and England and Kuwait and Egypt, and this whole uprooting or upping the stump, as you call it, yeah, it was something that I got very used to, and I saw a lot of my friends get used to, and some of them I've seen go on to like continue that kind of that pattern. It's like this psychology that some third culture kids have, where they just want to keep moving. There's like an internal clock. Like, I've spent 3 or 4 years in this one spot, I'm going to go somewhere else. But it's funny because you grew up basically in one spot, but you've been totally, it's almost like you were always natively okay with just moving from one place to the next.
Yeah, look, I mean, I go through phases of how okay with it I am. Sometimes I just wish we just sort of stay put, get embedded in a community, and make friends that are going to be around for the rest of our lives. And other times, you know, we see it a bit more adventurously and think, well, it's such a big, beautiful world. I've never lived in Africa. I've never lived in Central Asia, or it'd be cool to go to those places. And, you know, we got kids now, and that's part of it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the sort of person I am, the sort of things that I've enjoyed in the past is always just, you know, as soon as I get bored, I start thinking about, well, what if I move to a different country? That'd be fun. And that's kind of like an easy answer.
Well, so tell us about some of the countries that you've lived in.
So yeah, I mean, I lived in a few. I mean, some shorter than others in terms of duration. I lived in Australia up until, I guess, after I met John Watts, and after I finished my program with the Department of Defense. I got offered to do an internship with the UN in Beijing, in China. And so I was there for only about 4 or 5 months. But I also studied Chinese there for a couple of months as well. So I know Beijing pretty well. Made a lot of friends there. But then got offered the master's program. So I went to Singapore, and then I went to France to finish my master's. And then I went to DC. And from DC, we went to Myanmar. And from Myanmar, we came to Thailand sort of for a while. And then we went to Lebanon. And then we came back to Thailand. And that's where we've sort of stopped for now. So yeah, those are the main countries.
Wow.
And what drove all that travel after your master's degrees?
What drove it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned before, like the international development sort of lifestyle and career path. Also just interests. Yeah, each individual choice of going to a different country seemed to be driven by completely different circumstances. But I sort of created those circumstances by making choices about what sort of career and lifestyle I want to have, right? So it's just like following opportunities, I guess. That's a short answer. I went to China to follow that opportunity with the UNDP, the internship, and then I went to Singapore because of the scholarship with the school there. Went to France because I got offered another scholarship to finish my studies there. And then DC, I got offered a consultancy there. And then I think the first sort of like self-driven thing, rather than just sort of like being open to opportunities, my wife and I were at that point we were boyfriend and girlfriend, and we wanted to be back in the same place because I was in DC and she was in Singapore running a NGO or social enterprise technically. We both want to be back in the same place. We were both kind of bored and not that happy with the contracts that we had professionally. And we kind of felt like an adventure. So at that point in time, Myanmar was opening up after a period of, being very closed off to the world, and all sorts of excitement and money and new opportunities was being created there. So we followed those. Essentially went there to set up our own business without any particular contract or idea about how it was going to work. And just sort of stayed there for 4 or 5 years. And that was Myanmar. And since then, I guess we've been following opportunities again. My wife got offered a position in Lebanon, and then she got offered a position in Bangkok here. And so, we've been in baby making mode for the last few years. And so I thought that rather than my own particular opportunities, I would help my wife to follow her opportunities, because it's kind of hard to manage a career through those years. Where you're making babies, and
you guys are
chasing your opportunities for a while.
You both seem like go-getters for sure. And so, is there anything about Thailand beyond your wife's opportunity that kind of attracted you?
Yeah, like I knew Thailand pretty well after living in Myanmar for a bunch of years. Myanmar was a pretty frustrating and difficult country to live in a lot of ways, and the cheapest, easiest way to get out of the country was to come to Bangkok. Lots of flights, very cheap, discount airlines, and so we used to come here all the time. And it was refreshing because you got all the things that you miss from other countries, such as like good restaurants, good food. For some reason, food is the main thing, but also good beaches, nice, good, affordable ways to just relax. Some people describe Bangkok as like one massive day spa, and we used to come here and just like treat ourselves a bit when we've been spending a few months in Myanmar. And so yeah, the idea of when she got offered a position here in Bangkok, the main appeal for me was just like, great, we got babies, it's just easy. In Myanmar, everything was difficult, well, most things at least. And in Bangkok, you don't even have to leave your room. Like everything is an app, same as America, right? You can order food, you can order most things. And then if you want to leave your room, like there's heaps of cool places to go check out, good cafes, and if you want to get out of the town, then there's beaches and stuff. So it's an economy set up for tourism. So there's a certain amount of ease that is created by that, and And so after spending a few difficult years in Myanmar and Lebanon, which is also a difficult country, the idea of just like having a baby and maybe another baby in a place with great healthcare system, everything's just like a phone app away, and it's something that we're familiar and comfortable with. That sounded like a dream to me.
That's really cool.
Mm.
So when you guys dove into Myanmar and started a business, what kind of business was it, and did it rely on like a traditional kind of like capitalist? We try to provide a product and get people to pay for it, or was it more of a taking advantage of some of the international aid and attention that was coming into the country and doing something with that?
Interesting question. Yeah, I guess the answer is both, and it's a bit complex to sort of separate it with my business. Because to be honest, like after working for the World Bank and a couple of other UN organizations and also volunteering and stuff for a couple of NGOs, I wasn't really that interested in working in the social sector. I just found that the attitude that people have in the social sector is depressingly slow and impractical compared to work in the private sector. So I had no real intention of getting involved in the aid scene, but for my wife and I both, that's the sort of background and education that we had. And when we first landed there, all the money that was trying to flood into that country because it was being open and liberalized, America and other democratic countries really wanted that trend to continue, so they were trying to invest in it. And there were just so few people that were on the ground that could get things done, at least in terms of people that spoke good English, had a good education background, had experience in places like DC and other international organizations. People that foreign investors and donors were comfortable in dealing with. We were that sort of person, and there weren't that many people like us. And so opportunities just started flooding to us because, honestly, when we first arrived in Myanmar, the expat scene in terms of foreigners was so small. There was like a Thursday night party and a Saturday night party, and you would know everyone at the party. And so now it's completely different, of course, and maybe it's going to get small again given the recent events. But yeah, we just started getting opportunities thrown at us. But what we came there to do was to build the first startup incubator. And this is something that I was looking into in my work in DC just immediately before. And it's something that, in a different way, my wife was working on in Singapore before we came to Myanmar. And so, yeah, we had this particular business model in mind. We thought we'd go there for like a month, just like test the scene, see if people were receptive to it. And if people were receptive to the idea, then we'd invest a few more months in terms of trying to get it started. And then, people were receptive to everything at that point. It was such a suppressed and depressed entrepreneurial scene there. The startup ecosystem was basically nothing. And people, like particularly people that were entrepreneurially minded, they were just so hungry for everything that we were talking about that we just got sucked into that, and we're just trying to find a way to make it work. And the way initially that it started to work was getting donor money, basically, but also private sector money. We had some donors that was like the EU, some donors that were foreign companies, such as a Swiss company and a local company that wanted to give us some money. So there's little bits of money here and there coming from different types of sector. And then eventually the big money like USAID, the UN got organized, and that started coming in as well. We started to do bigger and bigger things.
Nice.
But yeah, it was always a mix between, the public sector money and the private sector money that we're trying to do things with. But the company that we started there, which was a business incubator, started to take on everything, right? It started to get so fragmented and weird in its scope. We were doing like anti-corruption projects for the OECD. We were doing, government advisory stuff for the German development organization, GIZ. And then we're doing like hackathons and boot camps and stuff with money coming from the UN. And then we're doing like consulting projects, like really traditional consulting projects, like assessing the value chains of like sesame seeds and automobiles for Volkswagen and Oxfam, and so it was just there's so many things coming in from all different directions, and we're just like trying as much as we could to manage it, and we're trying to drink from the hose, as you say, and yeah, we just the company itself, it's kind of difficult to describe what it was really. Eventually, I guess we had a consulting company, which was like doing traditional research and advisory work, and we had a startup incubator, which was doing like programs to help entrepreneurs, and it just sort of eventually we just ran out of people that can do things. And then when the foreign multinational companies came in with really, really big money, they were doing like telecoms and banking. All our good people just got sucked into that because they could offer better money. And eventually we found it really, really hard to have such a fragmented and an intense project pipeline. And that's when we started thinking about winding down and getting to a different country. So yeah, wow. I guess that's the story overall.
That sounds cool. It sounds like you were riding a wave of like there had been so much repression, and then it opened up and it released like this floodgates, and then you were kind of there to ride all of the craziness and all the different excitement in regard to that. So just to contextualize like when this was, Myanmar was under military rule until 2011, right? So would this be right around that time that you went?
Yeah, I mean, military rule, absolute military rule until 2011. They had like a bit of a democratic reawakening that was emerging in 2011. But I mean, you could probably argue that it has never come out of military rule, to be honest. So there's sort of like degrees in which, whether it's military or not. But yeah, in 2011, like there was a couple of what we call, black swan events where everyone was completely taken by surprise. It had been very much under the thumb of military dictators for at least 30 years. And yeah, all of a sudden there was a new president, Thein Sein, and he took over from another guy, Thein Sein? Gosh, I'm forgetting my names now. And anyway, he was a bit more pragmatic in terms of seeing that the situation in Myanmar, whatever model that they had working there, wasn't really working. People were poor. The country was being left behind. It was a very extractive, kleptocratic system, which in the end, it was not really working. And so he thought he would try something else. And so he started signaling that to the outside world by, I think there was this dam project in a copper mine that was sort of put on hold, where big Chinese investors were sort of said no to, which was the first time that ever happened. And then all of a sudden, American diplomats, other democratic countries were sort of coming in and saying, well, what's going on here? And then it seemed like he could be convinced, like sanctions were starting to come down. Foreign money was starting to come in, and so this was like a big injection of something new and in terms of resources, and they thought they'd try and make that work. And so this was of course tied to like democratic transitions, and so the democratic transition was happening gradually from 2011 to 2014, which is when the first democratic election was held. And that's when Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy, the NLD, they won in a landslide election. And so that period of time from 2011 to 2014, we were there for that. Actually, we came in early 2012 and sort of after things started to change. But that wave was starting to hit then. And wave of optimism, wave of enthusiasm, and wave of money and foreign interests. And it sort of peaked around about 2014 when the democratic election was coming, because the election, as good as it was that there was a democratic transition that was coming into fulfillment, it created a lot of uncertainty. And so from the perspective of foreign investors, that uncertainty translated to risk, and then they sort of like just put things on pause. They kind of wanted to wait and see to see what would happen. And then the Democratic Party got in, which is great, but their ability to administer the country, the clarity and consistency in their policies was not so great. And I feel like that wave has never come back ever since the democratic transition happened. And so there are some companies that stayed. Most companies kind of stayed and maintained an operation, but that flood of foreign interest and investment kind of subsided. And then, of course, there are some bad news stories coming out, such as the situation in Rakhine State, which is the state that borders Bangladesh and historically has a large ethnic Bengali population, which we call Rohingya. Is more Muslim, and so there was, eventually it started to gradually work towards like a pretty genocidal situation. And that is bad for investment, of course. I mean, it's bad for many other reasons which are more important, but in terms of this wave, investors looked at that and thought, well, this can't end well, and they were right. And it hasn't ended at all, but it's certainly not ending well. And yeah, so now that the military has come back in, I kind of feel like the wave is completely subsided. This wave, we'll still wait to see what's going to happen. Maybe it'll transition to that government that we had between 2011 and 2014, which was actually very pro-business, pro-foreign investment. Or maybe it'll go back to the dark ages where we're sort of trying to figure out what the trend is there. And a lot of my friends and former colleagues are pretty worried, to be honest.
It's very interesting hearing this from, it's like a financial lens. When you speak of the wave or the optimism, it's like the optimism of potential investors. Did you also pick up on optimism or maybe disillusionment on the ground by the people and the locals that you interacted with when you lived in Myanmar?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, I mean, even when the wave was coming, there was still disillusionment on the ground with the the average Myanmar person. Because that wave of resources, sure, I benefited from it. There are some Myanmar people that benefited from it too. But the proportion of Myanmar people that were benefiting directly from it in terms of increased incomes, general safety, better medical services, all the stuff that you'd expect from a country getting wealthier, most people weren't benefiting from it. People are still poor. And the ones that were really standing in front of the wave and getting all that, getting all the benefit from it, were the ones that had operations set up and they can like do something with that money. And most people weren't operating at that level. The ones that were generally were the wealthy elites that had already captured most of the economy, the extractive economy, the military-driven economy, and the ones that had managed to develop large organizations throughout that kleptocratic period and had managed to transition themselves sufficiently towards the sort of model that Western money was happy to deal with. There's a few big names there, but the ones that were military companies, even they benefited from it. But so the person on the street, the average day middle class by Burmese standards person, like they probably just continued. Maybe there were more opportunities. They got mobile phones and got connected to the outside world in a way which they hadn't before. So there are some benefits, but really, they had reasons to be skeptical, and they were skeptical. There were reasons to sort of just feel like, well, this is all well and good that there's more money coming into the country, and that's great. It's great to have a mobile phone now and to have a connection to the internet and the whole world. But really, the economic environment, the economic model hadn't changed significantly that the benefits were democratized, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's crazy. And the other thing is like reading about how Myanmar, it was under British rule until like 1948, and then starting in 1962 all the way up until 2011, if even that, it was under military rule. So it seems like generationally, or there's just like this sort of cultural memory of always being under military rule, always being under this like repressive regime. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about the build up to, what happened on February 1st, like some more context around that. Maybe tell us about Aung San Suu Kyi as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a shock to me that happened. I kind of stopped reading Myanmar news on a daily basis. So I think there are a few murmurs, a few rumblings from the military leading up to that, but not enough that you would expect that there'd be a coup. It seems as though, in terms of the backstory of what happened, essentially the election was run last year in the same way it was in 2014. Again, landslide for Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, the NLD. She won like 80% of the vote, around that sort of mark, which is huge, right? I mean, imagine if Biden won 80% of the vote. But basically, I mean, there's a lot of parallels with what happened in America. And I'm not sure how sensitive you guys are to talk about American politics.
We're not that sensitive.
Okay, good. So they kind of pulled a Trump. They basically said, well, this can't be the answer. This can't be the result. I didn't win. I don't believe it. I can't believe I didn't win. I was so confident that I was going to win that I'm just going to refute the results without any actual evidence. And as opposed to, like, I think Biden won the popular vote by 55% or something, maybe something around there.
Yep.
80% is a bit bigger, and you kind of need a bit of evidence to sort of show, well, there was absolute fraud in a more systemic way than just 55% would warrant. But I mean, similar to Trump, I mean, they just said, well, no, I'm just gonna. The accusation is sufficient. I'm going to argue until I'm blue in the face. But the military don't have to argue; they got the guns. And as I mentioned before, like the military was never gone. They were never put into a similar position to what we're comfortable with militaries in our democracies, where they don't have a privileged position. They can't just arrest power whenever they feel like it. So they always had that power. They can sort of just lock everyone up and take everything back. And they just decided to implement it there because I think the Myanmar Parliament was about to do their first sitting in Parliament like the day after, or a couple of days after February 1st. And so I'm not sure what they had on the agenda in that parliamentary sitting, but maybe it was something that they found a bit threatening. Or maybe they just got bored and maybe they're upset that they weren't winning enough in the way that Aung San Suu Kyi had set up the economy. I mean, they were winning pretty hard, but, not enough. And so I'm not sure exactly what the trigger was, whether there was a trigger, whether there needed to be a trigger. But eventually they said, well, we're tired of this. We're going to take the economy back completely. And, they already owned most of the economy. Sorry, my notifications are buzzing. But yeah, they had all the extractive sector pretty much tied up. Wood, mining, to some extent oil and gas, and a lot of it. I mean, they nationalized production of all alcohol and, beer companies. They got this company called Myanmar Economic Holdings, which is owned by the military government. And it's massive. They're making so much money, and all that money is just being piled into dark places which nobody knows about. And that wasn't enough for them, so they're just taking it back, and they're going to take everything else. And what that means in terms of all my friends who have set up companies there at the same time that I was setting up a company, or setting up NGOs, setting up all sorts of new initiatives and great things for that country, what it means for them is really uncertain. Whether they're just going to clamp down anything that doesn't suit them, which they were to some extent doing anyway. Whether they're going to try to take everything back that is worth taking, every bit of the economy that is making, surplus and profits, or whether they're just going to be happy with their existing setup in terms of their already massive and diversified economic holdings. We're not sure, but either way, it's bad news. It just creates a huge amount of uncertainty, and a lot of people are worried. A lot of people are thinking about getting out. A friend of mine who went there and set up an organization that does technology for development. So they do like hospital systems, they do maternal health apps and period tracking apps. They're doing really well. They've built a team of like 100 people in the same time that I built a team of like 5 or 6 and then got out. They built a team of 100 people. They've got a huge, awesome technology company making a huge difference with technology. And he just posted on LinkedIn yesterday, and I was super shocked that he's basically trying to get all these people out. And he's a really smart cookie. And I think, for him to make that sort of call, and he's trying to get funds so he can transport all those people out of the country. For him to make that sort of call really makes you wonder, about the fate of that country and where it's going. And so, yeah, I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. We're all trying to read the signs, read the tea leaves to figure out which way the military is going to go. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I've personally never experienced a coup. I imagine this week.
You nearly did the other day, right?
Uh-huh.
You nearly did in DC not so long ago here. Insurrection, we're calling it, right?
We're like 100 miles from there. Yeah.
That was a crappy coup. The Myanmar people know how to do a proper coup.
Yeah, that was absolutely a proper coup. I don't know what that was on January 6th. I'm not sure. And by the way, real quickly, a 51 to 49 margin, a 2% margin, that's considered close. Anything inside of that, outside of that 2% margin, it's not really considered close. 80 to 20, I mean, it's not about the vote at that point. It's just the military, for whatever reason, wanted to exert its power again.
And now they're justifying it. They're not just saying, hey, we want to take back all this economic control and power, but there's like a bullshit reason that they kind of show. Well, there was a fraudulent in the election, but then I also heard that it was something about walkie-talkies being found in Aung San Suu Kyi's house or something. What's the deal with that?
I probably have a walkie-talkie in my house. I don't even know. I mean,
yeah,
look, if they don't find the evidence they have, they'll just put the evidence there. There's a guy I know that was a reporter for an international news outlet, and a few years back he got asked to come have a meeting with a police officer, right, to get some information that he could use in his reporting. He rocks up, they arrest him, and they put some documents in his pocket, and they take him to court. Judge says, oh yeah, they found these documents in your pocket, which is seditious, and they locked him up. This kid's got no, he's not a kid. He's a guy with a young family, and they just locked him up for no particular reason. So the court system. There's no court system. Like you've at least got a pretty independent Supreme Court, even though it's pretty well stacked now. Like at many levels, there's no protections in Myanmar. If the difference between the sort of coup that someone like Trump can try to run in America and the sort of coup that you can have in Myanmar is that there are no protections in Myanmar. The institutions that protect democracy are just not there in Myanmar. The press is not sufficiently independent. The court systems are not sufficiently independent or rational. Everyone's bribable, and the military is still way too powerful and constitutionally enshrined. And so, yeah, it's a big difference.
So when the NLD actually got power in 2014, which is
sorry, my wife is calling.
Oh, no worries.
No, I mean.
Okay, I'll just restart. So when the NLD got power, which stands for is it National League of Democracy?
Yes.
Okay, cool. When they got power in 2014, was that really just kind of a victory in name only? Was the military still really involved? And to what extent was Aung San Suu Kyi and her party able to kind of actually build a democracy without being abused by what you say, all the corruption?
Yeah, good question. Pretty limited, to be honest. I mean, though, it's kind of a power sharing arrangement rather than a full taking over a democratic transition. And the reasons being is a bit technical, but basically the military set up a constitution before they have an election where they have a guaranteed 25% membership of the parliament. And so 25% is an important number because you need 75% to make a change to the constitution. So they need that super majority of 75% rate. So essentially, like, they were there, they could not be kicked out, and the NLD government didn't really have the power to do everything it wanted to do. And so passing constitutional reforms, at least, I'm not sure about other sort of like lower level laws and regulations, like there was a certain amount that they could do there, but the big changes were pretty limited in what they could do. Having said that, she didn't do as much as she could, I think. When I say she, like, she was also restricted in terms of her power. She wasn't the president, but she was like the de facto leader as well. And the big bits of the government were still basically military run. She took over most ministries, but the Defense Department, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Foreign Ministry, all those sort of big ones, she continued to, the military continued to run. And under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which manages the police, they also manage the General Administrative Department, which sounds very innocuous, but it's essentially running all the governments down to a village level. A lot of the day-to-day sort of what we would call like councils or county governments. A lot of the operations of that was put under this mega department under the Home Affairs Ministry. And so the reach of the military, even down to a township level, was still significant. And so she got these other ministries, like, ministries of hotels and tourism, ministries of transport, that sort of stuff, she got hold of, but it's not the mega departments of the government. And so really, I mean, she didn't have full control of the government ever. And they always had like a foot in the door that they could open the door and just walk right back in, which is what they've done.
She has an interesting character arc from, she was on house arrest for a while and became sort of like this human rights, like, darling of the world. And then it seems like her reputation just got a little bit more complicated because of this. You brought up the pre-genocide or the genocide of the Rohingya Muslim population, and her, part of what I was getting at with that first question was, like, she has come to the defense of the military quite a bit, despite them committing acts of genocide or rampant violence, and she's come under a lot of criticism for that. And so I'm wondering, like, is that because did she come to their defense because she felt like she had to and her hands were tied, and she was really just a leader in name only, or was it something else?
Yeah, it's tricky to answer that question, to be honest. I know people that would have a better understanding of those dynamics, having like worked with her in the government. And I feel like there's a mix of opinions about how much she could have done and how much she did, how much her hands were actually tied still after coming out of house arrest. My personal opinion is that she didn't do enough. And when she got back into power, I was one of the tens of thousands of people in the street partying, and so happy that had happened for everyone. And I got to say, she was, even before what happened recently on Feb 1, even before that, it's been a massive letdown. And so this is a continued letdown, of course, because it's going back to the way things were even before we went there, maybe. But yeah, in terms of the dynamics of what she could have done, look, the NLD, the National League of Democracy, it's still a nationalist party. And when I say nationalist, like Burmese nationalists, and Myanmar is a country of different ethnicities and different religious persuasions. There's a lot of diversity in the country, but her party, and people might disagree with it, is very much kind of like an ethnic Burmese party. And Burma is like the central core of the country, where it's the majority of the people, and then it's sort of on the peripheries of the country geographically and economically to some extent, and socially to some extent. You've got other minorities, and it's a big, rich tapestry. But the Burmese are generally Buddhist, and it's surprisingly popular. For very nice people. Honestly, Myanmar people are so nice, so kind. I found it surprising how many people I'd speak to that were completely in support of kicking out the Rohingya people, kicking out Muslim people, making it life difficult for Muslim people. And I can't speak about everyone. There are some people that are completely against it, but it was a popular position for her within her own electorates to take, and it's also a position which the Myanmar military was in favor of, I think, in terms of suppressing that particular ethnic minority. And so, but even then, like, you wonder, a person like her with an international outlook on life, she studied at Oxford, she speaks the Queen's English, she's got many friends, she was supported very much by the British government and other democratic governments when, in all those years, she was under house arrest. She's very well traveled. She reads a lot of news from the international media, lots of friends internationally, yet she still seemed to be fully in support of this very, I think a strange attitude to have towards that minority. So anyway, I think she could have done a lot more. We're all hoping that she would be like this Nelson Mandela figure, which would, during a tough, fragmented, tumultuous time, show some moral leadership, be that rudder for her people, because she is absolutely that figure. A lot of people look up to her, and steer the national sentiment towards something a bit more healthy, like Mandela did, doing what she needed to do to heal the country after a long period of suffering. To bring peace with all the regions that were still fighting against the central government, and particularly the military, and sort of like be that figurehead internationally for a country that's coming out of transition, normalizing. She could have done a lot more, and she didn't. And so I personally think that throughout all this time that she was under house arrest, the image of her as a very positive person, morally strong, someone that is aligned with the sort of sentiments that we hold dear internationally in terms of supporting democracy, supporting diversity in different types of people and different types of persuasions, the sort of things that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee would have been looking for. I feel like that was more a construct that was built by the democratic countries that were supporting her during the house arrest period. And the sort of person that she was underneath all that maybe sort of came out when she was released and she got to actually take power. And maybe she changed during that time. A lot of us become a bit more racist when we're getting older. But, I feel like we're all a bit hoodwinked, to be honest. And I feel really disappointed about her government and the choices she's made. Disappointed by their inability to govern properly. Like, even if you take away all that sort of her attitudes to about how to govern, she chose people that weren't really good at administering, departments of government. It was very much a group of activists that got out of prison and joined her political movement. And as much as I like activists for a lot of reasons, I don't really think that they're good administrators necessarily. And I feel like if you pack a government full of activists as leaders, then an ineptocracy is what you're going to get, and that's what they got.
Are you saying that for the first time, or is that a common term?
Ineptocracy?
Yeah.
I don't know. It sounds cool, right?
It does.
I'll claim it.
All right, we'll give you credit for it.
I'm sure if I Googled it, there'd be someone else. I might have read it somewhere.
It's all good. So I'm fascinated by the military decision. It sounded like they effectively had control, and we're talking about Suu Kyi being de facto leader, but that feels like a fairly hollow notion. The military, if I'm one of the power brokers in the Myanmar military, I'm letting this government continue, have international money come out, and I'm going to be even more powerful. I think this coup not only sets Myanmar back, it sets their military back. It seems like a bizarre thing. So I'm wondering what they thought was going to happen in the first day or two or three when the parliament met. But to an American or to an Australian, I'm guessing whatever their fears were either unfounded or silly.
I don't know, man. I mean, the flood of money that we were talking about in the wave that I was trying to ride, that's foreign money from transparent, open democracies, market-based systems. But there's huge floods of money coming from darker areas, right? And so whether that floods, those channels of money are bigger and better than the foreign money, which is usually comes with all sorts of conditions and transparency. Whether that money is better from a pragmatic point of view, I'm not sure, to be honest. Maybe not. And we got China on the border, and I don't want to hate on the Chinese or anything, but China is not going to be as conditional in terms of the way it spends the money. China has a lot of very important strategic interests in that country, not just in terms of like resource extraction, but it's got a pipeline going to the sea from China there, and so I suspect an unsubstantiated, unevidenced hypothesis, which a lot of people share right now, is that Chinese power is part of that, and China was losing under the previous regime, and they might be winning under the next one. So, yeah, I don't know. I wish I knew more about the current dynamics, but as I mentioned, I'm not reading enough about it anymore.
Oh, it's fascinating.
But it sounds like your friends are quite concerned, and the example you gave of the guy that runs 100-person company trying to get them all out. Clearly, I'm guessing the day-to-day experience hasn't changed that much, but clearly the fear is growing, and it sounds like there's going to be fairly significant exodus of expats and everything that they stood up there.
Yeah, let's see. I don't know. I'm glad I came out a lot earlier. But yeah, I'm worried for some of my friends, to be honest. Already some friends are sort of posting about people that they know have been arrested and put into prison. And even under the previous regime, there were people being arrested and put in prison. But I think there's going to be a spike and little bits of information coming out. But so far, the information is not good.
Wow, I didn't realize they were arresting beyond just taking over government buildings.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know, but yeah, a friend of mine said that his father-in-law was just arrested this morning. There are people that, similar to what's happening in Russia right now, right? People are posting videos of themselves getting arrested on social media, and they're turning off the internet and social media channels to prevent those sort of images and narratives from getting out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty tricky. I feel like I'm a far more depressive guest than your usual guest. Like all these bad news stories, and I don't know. There's some good times in Myanmar too. Don't get me wrong.
No, it's fine. I mean, we're really glad that you could set aside the time this week, because it's
yeah, you're our first. You're our fastest, I should say, from talking to me, trying to schedule it, to actually being on the podcast. I think our previous record maybe was 3 weeks. We got together in what, 3.5 days or so.
Sure. Before we stop talking about Myanmar, in case you're about to say, look, if you want to help people in Myanmar, usually if it's a natural disaster, I'd say like give to the Red Cross. There are plenty of good organizations doing good work. They're going to be under a lot of pressure, not only in terms of like donor money maybe contracting, or sanctions coming up, making it harder to do their work, making it less safe to do their work. If you've got some spare pennies lying around, I'm happy to share a few links on your podcast website if you want to help people in Myanmar. I've already got a couple of friends, as I mentioned, that are trying to raise money through like Venmo in the States. It's super easy to donate. And so, yeah, just think about, well, what you'd like to see in Myanmar, the sort of people that you'd like to support there. And I'm happy to make some suggestions of ways you can help out.
No, we'd be more than happy to share the websites and certainly let the world know in our own small way what's going on there. Cool. And by the way, Pete, I said it was a fantastic opportunity to talk to you. I still believe that. It sounds like you have connections inside the country, but is it hard to communicate with your friends still there?
So far, not too bad. Like the internet's off and on. So the government's been telling the ISPs, like the servers, to turn off at certain points in time, but it seems kind of erratic. So whether you get a message back immediately or you have to wait until the end of the day when the internet's back on, it seems like it's still possible to talk to people, which is cool. But I think certain sites have been shut down. I'm not sure if Facebook's still up, but WhatsApp I think is still working. So yeah, I mean, they could turn it off completely, and it'd be hard to talk to people if the internet was off. I mean, when I first got there, like very few people had a SIM card. It was like $300 to buy just a basic 2G SIM card when I first got there. But in the time that I was there, it went down to like $5, and so it was completely democratized. And so everyone has connections to internet. Some people have like multiple phones and stuff now, but it could, if they switch off the internet and switch off all the communications channels, then it could be going back to the dark ages where it's really hard to talk and you have to somehow just phone people up and try to get through with a really dodgy telecommunications infrastructure. Well, it was before. Now, actually, the telecommunications infrastructure is quite good because they had foreign companies build it. But yeah, I mean, I bought my first SIM card, which was a 2G SIM card when it got down to $80 because I was like dirt broke. I didn't have enough money to pay $300 for a SIM card. And even then, like the internet was horribly slow. We were like working on Edge, which, you know, I'm not even sure if you remember Edge, but it was like the technology before 3G. Yeah, so if they shut down Facebook already, for most people in Myanmar, like Facebook is the internet. They don't really know what the internet is without Facebook. And
that sounds awful. That sounds awful, by the way, Pete.
Yeah, I know, I'm not even on Facebook. But,
yeah, that's one of the like one of the things I see on Twitter. One of like the things mudslinging phrases is that Facebook helped, like it aided and exacerbated the Rohingya genocide. Have you heard that? And do you have any thoughts on that?
honestly, I don't know. I kind of feel like, you know, we could probably look at some periods of history where the printing press aided genocide, or, you know, telephones or something. To some extent, I feel like they could have done a lot more to make sure that hate speech wasn't getting out there. But yeah, tricky. Like a young lady that used to work for me in Myanmar, she finished working with me and then actually worked for Facebook and was looking at this issue really intensely, trying to figure out how to stop hate speech. So I know that there are people looking at it and trying to find out a way that their channel, this mega channel, which became the main channel for communicating to some extent in Myanmar, there were people looking at how to make sure that it wasn't being used for hate speech. The telecommunications companies, Telenor, which was one of them, and Urdu was another one, they were looking at this too, like trying to figure out, you know, how to make sure that the platforms that they were setting up, when telecommunications were getting back up, making sure that it wasn't being used for hate speech. But to a certain extent, like, you know, what are you going to do? People can talk in code. People can find ways around most ways of being blocked. And yeah, I don't know if I have a strong opinion about it, really. I kind of need to look into it more.
No, that's cool. I hear those kinds of things get thrown around, and as with everything on Twitter, I assume that there's a lot more nuance to the topic.
But even look in the States, like there's all sorts of weird stuff that people are posting on the internet. And, you know, in the last few months, I feel like Twitter's gone a little bit more serious. But I don't know, really, to what extent, if you're going to create a platform for everyone to share information, do you have to moderate every piece of information now? And maybe with AI and stuff, you can figure out who's being hateful and who's not, but that sounds really hard. I don't know.
It also starts with the definition of hate speech, and that will be debated till the end of time. So I was going to segue, Pete, to you're an entrepreneur now, and so tell us about it. You said, was it travel tech that you're trying to do?
Yeah, when I first left Myanmar, like I had this bee in my bonnet to try to set up this company that I thought about the product idea back in 2015, well before I left Myanmar. And when my wife got a job in Lebanon, I had to sign this thing with the Lebanese government to say that I would not get a job. And so I kind of had time. And so I started trying to build this company called Window Seater, which we're starting with the UK, but basically imagine you're taking a train. And there's all sorts of interesting things that you can see outside the window. I mean, some things that you might not even think about, like changes of the trees and the ecology, interesting buildings that you might pass by with interesting stories. Changes in demographics and stuff which you can't even see, which, you're moving through all these interesting transitions that have interesting stories. And there are some points of interest with some particular places with really interesting stories that can surprise you. I try to set up a platform called Window Seater which connects you to those stories, which basically, in short, it's an audio guide for train journeys. But it's more than that. Like we're really trying to do something different in terms of the sort of content which what you'd expect from an audio guide about a train journey. I mean, sometimes you take these touristic trains and they've got like some PA announcement that's telling you about some kitschy stuff about certain things. But what we're trying to do is like really help you to get to understand the places and the landscapes you're traveling through, to figure out, to treat it as a huge learning opportunity to understand the economic, geographical, societal stuff that's happening outside your window. And also like just to have a bit of fun, like there's some really fun, cool stories about places that you can see too. So I started building that back in 2015, 2016, with crappy little prototypes. And we're at the point now that we're approaching companies in the UK to try to secure long-term contracts with them. But we're not quite there yet, to be honest. It's not a viable company just yet because all these companies are saying, oh, we're so interested in this and your price point's really, really cool. But right now, our ridership is down to like 10% because of the pandemic, and we're just bleeding cash, and we're just trying to keep our people paid. And the idea of giving you a few $1,000s here and there doesn't really make sense to us right now. So, yeah, the company has come a long way. It's been like a passion project for a long time, but it's not really a company yet. I've got 2 co-founders in the UK that are doing great work over there, but yeah, it's been tough.
That sounds exciting and very gutsy. I don't think I'd ever have the guts to try something like that. I hope the pandemic ends tomorrow and you guys start soaring in a few months. By the way, you mentioned the pandemic. What's it like in Thailand? Just a couple minutes on what the pandemic effect has been there.
It's embarrassingly good over here. My kid just went to school. I just dropped him off before. The school's been shut down here and there, but to be honest, like there's like 70 deaths from the virus here, which, obviously is not very good, but compared to what you guys are experiencing in the States, we've been very, very lucky.
70 deaths in all of Thailand?
Yeah, it's a country of 60 million people. So
oh, wow.
Like California size. So we've been so lucky, honestly. And I'm not even sure I can explain it. Like the government took it really seriously. They closed the borders, made international arrivals go through 2 weeks of quarantine. And they've been doing that for a long time. The tourist economy here has been shot. And that's been heavy hitting for people here. That's the pain. The pain hasn't been so much about the deaths and people getting sick, but yeah, a lot of people are suffering in that respect. But honestly, they've invested pretty heavily into getting the virus under control at the expense of the economy. And I think that's the right answer, which a lot of other countries haven't been doing. Which it just means that a lot of the economy can go about its business and continue operating to a large extent. And yeah, we move about the country, the city and the country pretty freely. Everybody wears masks. It's a very compliant, culture, I guess. And there's not many people that are going to say, oh, "Screw you! I'm a free person. I'm not going to wear a mask."
Like they would in Texas, Pete.
Right. I mean, anywhere in America, really. I mean, there's certain people that, and God bless them, right? They're right to a lot of it, to some degree, but not when it comes to pandemics, right? You all just got to chip in and do your part, and everyone does that in Thailand, which is great. They're great people in that respect, and so I think that's a lot, a lot of the story that right there, just the people, helping each other out, and yeah, they've been doing pretty good contract tracing. But having said all that, like we're getting about 800 cases a day right now, which is the highest it's ever been. We had, for most of the pandemic, 0 cases a day, only the ones that are coming in from international arrivals going into hotel quarantine. But what they did miss is, particularly Myanmar people that have come across to work in the fishing sector. They weren't looking hard enough with those sort of people, and the virus has taken off in Myanmar, and it's sort of coming across the border because the border is quite porous. And so we might not be out of the woods just yet, to be honest. And it's probably going to take a while before a middle to lower income country like Thailand gets the vaccine. So we're not counting our chickens.
Yeah. So what I knew about Thailand before we spoke with you, Pete, was the beaches are beautiful. Bangkok has a ton to enjoy. Scuba diving is amazing, but literally everything else I learned from one of the Hangover movies.
Yeah, that's everything else, really. You didn't. That's all the sordid stuff. Yeah.
Daniel, have you seen Hangover 2?
No, I've only seen the one where they're in Vegas.
Yeah. Hangover 2 is a good movie. It rivals the first one. Anyway, I didn't mean to digress to the silly Hangover movies.
No, it's funny. Like Thailand is a strange place in that respect, because you could live a really wholesome conservative life in Thailand without touching on any of the slutty side of it. But then you like walk a street over, and then all of a sudden you're in it. It's prostitutes galore and weird stuff going on. And it's really unique in that respect, because a lot of international visitors will come to Thailand, particularly they'll land in Bangkok or Phuket, and they'll go straight to that street because all the tourist advertisements is telling them to go to that street, and they look around and think, oh, wow, this is not for me. And then they cruise off somewhere else, and that's the impression they get of Thailand, but it's not that. You can avoid that. Like I haven't been to those areas for a long time, and I've got kids, I'm not going to go there. But yeah, when I first arrived in Thailand as a backpacker, it was crazy. It was very much us living the hangover, literally and figuratively. So yeah, it's a fun country in that respect. If you want that, you can get it.
Yeah, it's definitely on my bucket list to make it to both Phuket and Bangkok.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Pete, you did not come across as an introvert.
Okay, cool.
Tonight.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
I'm surrounded by introverts in my job, actually.
I feel like I might have come across as a bit serious, really, because I got so many fun stories to tell about Myanmar and everything. But it's a bit dire right now there, and it's kind of hard to bring out those funny stories about that country when things are really not funny right now.
Yeah, it's a very, very heavy situation there, and yeah, we'll have you back on in a while, Pete, and you can tell us those fun stories, and hopefully, things are lighter in Myanmar and that part of the world. Yeah,
same with you guys. Hope your part of the world gets a bit more normal too. It's looked like it's heading that direction, but let's see. In the meantime, thanks for chatting to me today. Glad that you found whatever I was doing the last dozen years or so was fun or interesting.
Very much so.
Yeah, Pete, we love unique stories, and in my sphere, that your story is extremely, extremely unique.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, great to meet you guys. Have a great day and weekend.
All right, thanks, Pete. You do the same.
Thanks, Pete.
If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to subscribe through whichever app you're using. To share your thoughts, head over to our website at podso1.io, and there you can comment on episodes or send us feedback directly. Thanks for listening.